What's up, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Rocket Fuel. Today, I'm talking to Mike from Starts With Me. We've got a conversation that I think is super long overdue of all the different conversations we've had with founders, with the community. I think this is a topic that comes up either on the pod or offline very often, which is managing mental health in a place of moving fast, whether that's the founders themselves, whether this is entrepreneurs, whether it's people working at startups, but quite frankly, it's for anybody. And so with World Mental Health Day approaching, we wanted to bring on an expert to talk about this holistically, from burnout to balance and mental health tips for people that are working in these fast-paced worlds. So for that, I'd love to welcome to the show, Mike. Mike, why don't you give us a little bit of background about your expertise in this area and why you think you'll be able to help us shed some light on the topic today?
Yes. Hi, Mike. Thanks for this opportunity. It all started really with my own personal catastrophes with addiction and mental illness, and kind of that being the biggest problem in my life up until about the age of 30. I also have a brother who lives with schizophrenia, and mental illness and addiction is intertwined in my family tree. So that's the genesis of it all, really. And then when I got sober and started putting my life back together, I don't often talk about it, but I was also a professional poker player. So I did really well in online poker and a little bit live, which actually helped me kind of sober up in a funny way, because those things often are contradictory. But anyhow, so as I was sobering up and continuing to play poker, I didn't always want to play poker. I had a kid, and then when my second kid was coming, I thought I need to get a real job. So I started working with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, the Mental Health Commission, all these sort of large organizations in Canada as a educator for young people. And then as that went along, I sort of tried to build this consultancy, I guess you could say. Starts With Me. And then I also thought, wow, if this doesn't work, I better have a backup plan. So I went back to school to do a master's in counseling psychology so that I could be a therapist as a backup plan. And then COVID happened. And anyway, that's sort of the short and not so short story of kind of what brings me here.
Awesome. So you've got some personal lived experiences. You've got some practice helping others with this, and then you've got some professional accreditations that help you
Correct.
with this. And so bringing this together, I think you're able to not just talk about solutions, but maybe personal experiences that have helped you, and you can kind of share things from a deep sense of empathy for what people are going through in that regard.
Yes. Yeah, I could expand on that
Yeah.
but if not, yeah, I guess. And that was the genesis of Starts With Me. In another sense, was how do we bring basically what you just said to the world? Grandiose idea, and then make it very practical. So some of my colleagues, one's a psychiatric nurse, two of them are professors, and others a business person. So we just tried to put all of that together and to deliver a message that was wise, insightful, not arrogant or narrow-minded, you could say. And that's a balance, and that's a bit of a tricky thing to do. But I think we did a pretty good job, and it led to some wonderful opportunities and experiences. One quick note on empathy. I won't stop thinking about it unless I say it. There's a bit of a misnomer with empathy, and there's a great psychologist who we had at one of our annual events, Paul Bloom. He has a book called Against Empathy. He teaches at U of T now. He used to teach at Yale. He's a pretty sort of world famous psychologist. Anyhow, the point being that empathy, particularly in a workplace, and we have a whole, you can watch it on YouTube. We talked about this with him. It's not a good gauge of effective decision making. So empathy gets in the way of us making better decisions because we tend to take on the emotions of other people, and we tend to perhaps not make thoughtful, rational decisions about the person's situation. And perhaps a more helpful lens to that is this idea of compassion, or there's other names for it, but that's the name I like to use. And compassion is empathy plus action in some sense. So I can hold, or I can see this person's suffering, and I'm not going to take it on myself. And I'm going to be able to think about what the best thing to do for this person and me, or the company, or the team, or the family, or the whatever. So I'll just stop rambling with that.
No, I think that's good. And I think that one other thing that I just wanted to make sure that we cover is, you're being very humble, but Starts With Me has helped or worked with some amazing clients. And so maybe it's worth you listing some of those off, because I think if you're a startup, you're an entrepreneur, the advice you're about to get is things that larger companies would pay lots of money for, and some of the very notable companies are tapping into Starts With Me for. And so I just want to highlight, I know you're being super humble about it, but I think it's worth highlighting some of the companies you've worked with, and then we'll start to dive into things. That way people kind of know the spectrum of what we're talking about here.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, we've worked with Amazon, Hyundai. We're partnered with the big school boards in the GTA. Who else? McKesson, which is sort of Rexall. McKesson's a gigantic pharmaceutical company. I'm blanking here. So many different. Arc'teryx was another big one, although they're perhaps not like gigantic, but their brand is just so.
I love them.
Sort of like the Mac of, well, my opinion, the Mac of clothing. Anyway, Arc'teryx is another big one. I think that sort of covers the gist. There's others, but those are probably the main ones. And the work with Amazon, unfortunately, got interrupted by COVID. And that really sucked a lot, because we were... Anyway, that aside, those are some of the companies we've worked for. It's been a wonderful opportunity and experience. And yeah, that's my answer.
That's cool. So maybe let's just start with what is burnout and balance. And I don't know, maybe you have a place that makes more sense to start, but maybe it's worth just defining the challenge, which is burnout, or the inability to achieve balance, and what that stems from, and what manifests that.
Yeah, I think the general definition of burnout is basically stressing yourself out to the point where you can't do anything. Like the body shuts down and there's no motivation. Being able to think clearly is very difficult. Perhaps a lot of people get agitated, sad. It's not the same thing as depression per se, but many of the symptoms mirror the symptoms of depression. And it tends, again, I like the balance, or the burnout balance paradigm, because it is sort of contradictory to balance. So people work long days, they don't sleep well, perhaps they're not eating very well, maybe they're consuming substances to help with that, which exacerbates the problem. And then the body just shuts down. The body says no, basically. And the other problem with that is, once you get to that point, regenerating the energy and the motivation and balance takes so much longer, because your body is just shut down. So that in workplaces, I would say one of the characteristics of really high performing leaders, or people in general, is their ability to, I don't know if push themselves is the right word, but push themselves to their limits, know when they're getting there, and know when to slow down, or just to take the foot off the gas a little bit, recharge, and then they push forward. And I think sometimes you have to, one of my mentors always said, life punishes us first, then teaches us the lesson. So sometimes you just have to burn out and hit a wall so that you can learn how you got there and what you might be able to do differently next time. I would say also, in terms of this, I think this was most clear, probably because we spent the most time with Amazon, but I'm just trying to think if there's any other good examples. we did a lot of work with the city of Toronto, which was kind of cool with some of their management. But um, Amazon selects for people that are really good at what I just described, right? So I don't know if it's fair to say they weed out people who likely aren't able to do what I just described. Obviously, no one's perfect. Life gets in the way. Things are difficult. And that's where sort of, I can't remember if you mentioned it prior to us recording, this idea of how do companies or teams or startups support people so that they mitigate burnout to the best of their ability. And I think some of those bigger companies, they push people, no doubt, and it's a high-paced, rough environment for a lot of people. But that goes with the territory. So that's my best answer to the question.
So what are some of the signs that you talked about? There's like, I guess, some physical, emotional, behavioral things. Like how do you catch yourself? And then I think we can talk about some other things, but like, what are the watches someone that might be experiencing or on a journey to burning out and trying to catch it before it's too late? What are things that people should be thinking about, looking for, self-identifying right now as they're listening? Like, is this me?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would just caution at is for some of us, we have the tendency to just assume it's us automatically. Some of us are just a little bit more neurotic like that. I don't know if I am that way anymore, but anyhow, the one idea that I think is very useful as a start is the idea of a baseline. So we all have different baselines. Some of us are more resilient to stress. Some of us are less resilient to stress. Some of us are more resilient to anxiety, all these kind of things. So it has to be self-referential, which I think people struggle with a lot. Oh, I am not working as hard as my colleague, therefore I am bad or lazy or whatever. Or that person can sleep 4 hours a day and I can't, and they can work 20 hours and I can't, and that means that I'm, whatever, not good enough kind of idea. So this idea of a baseline is very important, and it's personal to you. How much sleep do you need? Do you need exercise? What is your diet like? Do you need social connection? Do you get agitated really easily or not? So we want to figure out our own baseline. And it has to be self-referential. I'll probably repeat that often. That's a really important piece to all of this. We cannot compare ourselves to other people. We can use other people as for information, right? Or perhaps for reflection. If we get too caught up in comparing ourselves to other people, we're screwed. So find your baseline. Again, I'll repeat it again. How much sleep do you need? What's your diet like? How are you taking care of yourself, etc.? And then you gauge yourself on the baseline. So if you start sleeping less, working more, spending less time with friends, then generally your reaction to things starts to be not what you're used to, right? So for me, it would be something like, because I spend so much time with my wife and kids, it's how am I reacting to them? I'm pretty good out in the world. It's just when I get home, So if I'm being impatient with them, if I'm getting angry a little bit more, if I'm not as connected or interested in them, that to me, that's a sign that I'm getting burnt out. I also probably tend to catastrophize more. I worry more. I'm more negative, all those kind of things. I can't focus. I can't read a book for more than 5 minutes. I can't write an email without getting frustrated. So those are the signs for me. You could think about it too in terms of what are your thoughts, what are your emotions, what are your body sensations, and what are your behaviors. So that's a self-referential thing. If you want to look out for your colleagues, this is another thing we often go through with groups or teams, is what is, generally speaking, what are your colleagues' baselines? So are they always on time for meetings? Are they always generally well kept? Are they generally pleasant and upbeat? So that might be their baseline. And then as you see them start to behaving differently, You may get curious. Oh, it sounds or seems like so and so is not their normal self today because they're late, whatever it is that they're doing. For someone like me, if I all of a sudden showed up in a tuxedo or a really fancy suit, someone would be like, something's wrong with Mike. That's not how he normally dresses. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, and on that same topic, like finding your baseline is an important piece. Is there any advice or tools for people that might be so far past their baseline or over their skis? I think oftentimes this manifests itself in, yeah, I know I need to, do more physical activity. I know I need to be eating better and managing my health, but like, I just don't have time. Right. And I think that's a funny balance thing. So yeah, how would you, excuse me, how would you help people identify that, or what tools if you're already over your skis?
Yeah. I think it goes back to the thing I said about sometimes life has to punish you first before it teaches you the lesson. Some people will not allow themselves to accept that reality until they're told or they're fired or there's something, whatever it is. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. And I think sometimes people who look out for those people, or if that person's on your team or is a loved one, it's so difficult to watch that happen and feel powerless over helping people. So that's one thing I think it's important that we remember. Sometimes this just happens to people, and there's not really anything you can do about it. And I know people, I don't like saying that and accepting that, but it's true. The other piece, I like the idea you said of getting over your skis. So if you are that person and you said it perfectly, yeah, I don't have time, or yeah, I just gotta, after this project is completed, then I'll take a break, or I just need
10
that
years
bonus.
deep into saving vacation days.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say the number one most important thing for good mental health outside of sleep absolutely is the number one thing. Outside of that, it's honesty. That's my opinion. So when somebody is doing what we just described, they're lying to themselves, or they're deceiving themselves, or they're rationalizing things they know. Some part of them knows that they're not telling the truth. And it can be helpful for other people to put the mirror up to them. Although, again, if that person doesn't want to accept it and take responsibility for it, there's nothing you can do. So if you are that person and you're on the teeter-totter, this isn't rocket science, you've heard this before, asking for help, acknowledging that you're struggling or that you're on that teeter-totter is the only way through. To use, for lack of a better word, spiritual language, you must surrender to the reality of your situation, right? Or accept it, or whatever it is. Because the more you struggle, the more and more you get to that place of burnout, and then you're screwed. Yeah.
So then maybe let's start to talk about some ways to maintain better mental health or work through some of these things. But maybe let's start with work and then go down into like personal things, goal setting at work in life. I'm curious, and I think, we talk about work-life balance. And some people think that's, running at things and then showing that they can take a week off, and then taking that week off and then coming and going back to 150% sprint. And maybe that is, I don't know, is that balance? Is it better to achieve it throughout? Is that a symptom of these people that get over their skis and just trying to show that they can get to a moment and check the box on taking that time off? Like, what's better? Is there a better? Does it depend? Like, should you be parking, finding those moments, not using your vacation days all at once and sprinkling it? Is there a perspective on which one's better or how people should think about it?
I'll refer to the baseline thing again. I think what matters is what that looks like for you as an individual. There's another idea in that context of, I already mentioned it, I'll be okay when, right? Or once this thing happens, then I'll take a break, or whatever it is. And that's just not how reality works, or that's not how the brain works, kind of thing. We kind of want to practice bringing that into the present moment. And what I mean by that is, I'm stressed. Maybe I need to take an hour off, or maybe I need to go and have a nap. I think that the first part I'm getting carried off into the second part of the question. The first part of the question is sort of, what are fundamental aspects of good mental health? I think you said something like that. First piece, for sure, again, I'll repeat it, is sleep. I have clients psychotherapeutically who, same thing kind of over and over. They're struggling with this and that. And the question is always, have you addressed the sleep situation yet? Right? Last time we talked about you going to the sleep apnea appointment, getting your sleep apnea machine, and the person's, oh no, I didn't do that. Right? It's like, well, you can't address the other stuff if you're not sleeping. Like, I really do believe that. I mean, you can do little things, but so sleep, number one. And then for everybody, in some sense, it's different for everybody. Although we clearly know there's fundamental things beyond sleep, exercise or movement, social connection. It's not rocket science. The rocket science is in the application of these things from day to day. Right? Getting out of the way, if you will, of your ego or your sort of self-centered, fear-driven behavior. Right? I have to keep working. I have to keep working, or I won't get the job, or I won't get this, or I won't get that, or whatever. That sort of panic-driven motivation is a losing long-term strategy. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I'll probably just stop with that. Does that kind of...
No, that makes sense. So I think you said that this starts with sleep, and it's about being honest with yourself. What are some of the other key elements of self-care and attributes of things that you should be thinking about to improve your mental health? So sleep would be one foundational element. What are some of the other things that, pile into this framework for better or good mental health?
Yeah. Okay. I think, so again, let's just repeat the stock answers of sleep, exercise, social connection, things that we all kind of know. I would probably say another one is, and maybe this is the most important beyond those, is the internal dialogue you have with yourself about yourself. So that little voice in your head that never goes away, okay? That's what we would call our conscience, or something like that. People's relationship with that is huge. So how do you kind of cultivate that? It's sort of different. It's difficult to give a stock answer. Depending on the person and the situation and the nature of that internal dialogue, I would give different feedback, but I guess it would be, get into relationship with that inner dialogue and get to know how it speaks to you. I heard somebody the other night describe it quite well, said something like, I'm not good enough, nobody loves me, and I'm ugly, or something like that. So that tends to be common for people, and people often, I guess another thing you could think about is, what is the nature of that voice when you fail or feel inadequate or think that you're not doing a good job at the things that you care about? I know it's difficult to give kind of stock answers, but that's sort of one way to think about it, right? So if you get a bad email from a client, or you get a bad feedback from a boss, or somebody says something to you that upsets you, what's the nature of that inner dialogue? And then working with that and getting to know that, and really is sort of the secret to some contentment in life in some ways. So that, I would say that, and then other things, practicing gratitude. And nothing I'm going to say perhaps is new information to people. And this is what we work with these groups or teams or even individuals in some sense, is it's, you know what to do in theory. You can Google it in 5 seconds. You can get a list of 10 things to do. It's how do you actually do those things? And how do you, I guess, integrate them into your life in such a way that when you stop doing them, because we all do, unless you're one of those super disciplined people, which I am not, how do you get back on the pathway or whatnot? And one way, another perhaps, so get in touch with that internal monologue. Another thing that might be helpful for people to know and to not feel so alone about is we all, many people, and this is cross-culturally, okay, and this is not a kind of unique to Western society or anything like that. We know this cross-culturally. Everyone has that deep self-negative perception, right? Negativity bias towards ourself. And sometimes people also don't allow themselves to be kind to themselves. If I'm kind to myself, then I'll become lazy. If I'm compassionate to myself, then I won't work hard, and I need to kind of whip myself into shape over and over and over, because I'll never, I have high standards and I'm going to be this person. And if I don't kind of shit on myself all the time, then I won't be that person. And that's not true. Okay. It has, for the business people out there, that speaks to the law of diminishing returns, right? So the more and more you're hard on yourself and whip yourself, the less and less returns you get from that orientation. And that's what, back to the original thing, that's what leads to burnout. So what's the nature of your internal negative self-talk? And also, what's the nature of your internal self-appreciation? A lot of us have a hard time with sort of being good to ourselves in that way. I was going to say one other thing about, so nature of internal dialogue. Oh, gratitude. That's sorry, I got onto the gratitude thing. Not rocket science, okay, but practicing gratitude is a very helpful way to maintain or to mitigate that the human tendency for the negativity bias. Furthermore, even beyond just being grateful for things, so maybe you have a daily gratitude practice, write down 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for every day. And it can be, for me, it's the same thing over and over. I'm grateful I'm sober. I'm grateful for all the people that helped me. I'm grateful to live in Canada. I'm grateful that my kids and wife are healthy and my family's healthy, those kind of things. It's not, you don't have to come up with some grandiose thing. It's about the repetition of the gratitude to sort of wire the prefrontal cortex and the neurons in your brain to be more habitual with the more helpful thinking processes. And then the other side of gratitude, which, I don't know how they come up with this stuff, but the neuroscience suggests that if you express gratitude to others, that's more helpful, or that elicits more positive emotion. So thank your colleague for helping you. Thank your boss if they are kind to you. Thank the person who holds the door open for you on the subway. Little acts of gratitude towards others goes a huge way in boosting our own well-being. When we see other people pleased, that boosts your pleasant emotion. And that's another little thing you could kind of squirm in there. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is this idea of values. So we got, what's the internal sort of chatter, both positive and negative, express gratitude to others and to yourself or to the universe for whatever you have. And then the last piece I would say is this idea of values. So what do you value in life? And I don't mean I value having a nice car, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I do personally, okay, but there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it's more, I value being patient. I value being supportive to others. I value being compassionate. I value being disciplined. I value being hardworking. And am I living in alignment with those values? And it's when we don't live in alignment with the values that we tend to really suffer as well. So values are a direction. We never cross a finish line. And goals help us get, or goals kind of keep us in alignment with the finish line, or sorry, with the values, the direction. That was a lot, so I'll pause with that.
No, and I think you started talking about some of the to your point, the things, the building blocks, let's call them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is the first time you're hearing it. Maybe it's not. They're very easy to find: mindfulness, sleep, exercise, nutrition, all those things. Gratitude is a newer one that maybe not everyone knows about or thinks about in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, the hardest part, and the part you and the Starts With Me team work with companies on, is implementing that.
Yes.
And actually taking steps towards achieving the right levels of, or integration of those things.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Like, let's talk about that then. If that's one of the most important pieces, what are some frameworks that people can start to use to think about where they are today and how to get to a good baseline? Once they figure out their baseline, maybe that's a different piece, but what are the steps? What can someone do today against some of those things to start implementing the change to hopefully directionally either catch themselves, create that change, and avoid possibly burnout? Or maybe they've burnt out already, to your point. And now they're just trying to implement these things that they know they have to do. They've heard them enough times. So what's that look like?
Okay, I'll try to give a personal and a corporate, if you will, example. The personal one is you can't do it alone. At least, again, unless you're Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or, some of these larger than life characters, and they don't even do it alone either. Okay, let's just make that clear. I think about athletes too. LeBron James literally has an army of people around him that manage his 24 hours. So he isn't where he is by doing it himself. So you can't do it alone. You need help and guidance, whether that's a therapist or a coach or a trainer or a friend or a whoever it is. You can't do it alone. That's important. Asking for help is generally a way to start not doing things alone, or seeking help or mentorship or whatever. And then the idea, I guess, of the baseline, or you could think about it, to use more business language, an inventory. So let's do an inventory of our 24 hours or our 7 days of the week. How much am I sleeping? Am I exercising? Am I doing this? So you need to know where you are prior to kind of figuring out where you're going to go. So you could do an inventory. And in our sort of consulting package, if you will, we ask companies to do an inventory as well. So let's do an inventory of your mental health stats or KPIs, whatever kind of language you want to do. So to flip it into the corporate kind of idea, let's do an inventory of, there's so much data, and some companies collect more data than others. So what are your mental health KPIs? And I think Deloitte has done a really good job at trying to publish material to help companies sort of understand this stuff at a deeper level. But that's a long conversation, and it depends on the team and how many people you're working with and that kind of thing. So that's a longer conversation. But yeah, what are the mental health KPIs of the company? Are you tracking them to begin with? If it's say you're on a small team of 10 people or something like that, this kind of goes back to what you were saying before of, I don't have time, right? Or we'll deal with it when. I get more excited about those smaller kind of situations because it's just easier to implement change. This idea of less is more, right? So if we actually went from 18 hours a day to 16 and spent those 2 hours hanging out together and chatting about whatever, I would probably keep the politics out of it, but let's chat about life and what's good for us kind of thing. that will actually make the team more productive. I know I'm giving a simplistic answer to it, but so some of the work we've done, which has been the most pleasant for me at least, is consistent time with teams to help them understand how do we make use of an extra hour or two to tune inward. This idea of like a U-turn. What do I need in this moment? How can I bring myself the attention or the mindfulness or the self-awareness to help me chill and relax? And when I am doing it in front of my colleague, I give them the invitation to do it themselves, kind of idea. So this idea of less really is more, right? Obviously, there's subtleties to that and nuances to that, but I think that answers the question to the best of my ability right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple pieces you talked about there. I think one piece I want to talk about the company as an entity and their role in this.
Yes.
But if you're a founder, let's a lot of our listeners may not have a team or might be a very small team, 3 or 4.
Yes.
And that pressure of the thing you keep saying, which is like, when, if this, then you're pushing out the moment. And I think in a world of startups, there's an inherent pressure to move fast because the clock is ticking. Someone will get there first. Money will run out. You will not succeed. So it's really hard. And everyone has a hard. Everyone has a hard of like what that looks like in terms of, if I don't keep going, I will miss my target. If I don't keep going, I won't get the job. And for founders, it's no different, but seemingly maybe the pressure feels more personal, right? In a bigger company, you may very much feel like, if I don't get there, that it sucks.
Yeah.
But it's a big entity. Whereas in a founder position or an entrepreneur, it's very personal. It's tied to your identity a lot more. What are like things you should lean on or turn to try to help break that cycle? I think we're saying it. That doesn't mean it's registering.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you get the help? Where do you start?
Probably be very rich if I had the perfect answer to that question. It's a great question. So maybe also just to clarify, the stakes in a company. I was just talking to a client recently where they could work more and maybe they'd get a promotion and but they don't really want to, and that's okay. They could drop the ball here, they can drop the ball there. It's a giant corporation, right? The ball, it will go on. I think returning to that sort of baseline, it's personal, it's connected to your values, and if you're okay, I don't want to say burning yourself out, but if you're okay, burning the candles at both ends, and you're doing this because it really matters to you and you want that, I don't see really anything wrong with that, as long as you're taking responsibility for it and you know that you're doing it consciously. Mm-hmm. If you're aware of that, but you don't want to burn yourself out, you use the word identity, which I like identity. My fundamental belief, if you will, or orientation to psychological experience comes from Buddhist psychology. And one of the things we learn in Buddhist psychology is identity equals suffering. Okay. Or when you attach to an identity, you suffer. When you attach to anything, really, you suffer. But so I think sometimes it's helpful to be curious about how you self-identify with what you're doing, right? I'm a boss, I'm a founder, I'm a this, I'm a that, I must therefore do this. And again, it would take a long time to really unpack all of that, but the simple notion would just be to bring a little curiosity to that. Really, is that true? Is it true that if you don't get this next contract, it's all over kind of idea? Likely not. The company may not exist, but you're going to be okay. That kind of idea. So this brings me into another avenue of this stuff. We did some work. I think it's fair to say this. I think there's no NDAs on this. We trained about 300 managers and supervisors for the city of Toronto who basically run their youth programs. And it was specifically about self-harm and self-injury and kids in city programs. And I'm just trying to say this properly. What we worked on is facing the darkness, basically. So often we avoid acknowledging and accepting the darkness, right? Or the things that are very difficult and that we don't want to face. And so going back to this analogy of, oh, once I get this contract, once this, I just need to keep pushing and pushing. It's, well, maybe, right? Maybe. And I know this is sort of counter to the hyper, I don't think it's fair to say capitalistic, because I am in favor of capitalism. I got no issues with it. But this idea that like I must, accumulate and achieve and get higher numbers and all that kind of stuff. It's likely not true. Whatever that story you're telling yourself about what you must achieve in this moment and what it means about you as a person is most often an illusion. And so we're trying to pull that apart a little bit. This isn't, I guess, a statement about me and my worth or something like that. I know it's kind of it's hard to really granularly explain all of this in a brief time, but I think that gets the point across to the best of my ability. And sometimes maybe taking a pause and just reevaluating what your motives are and what your intentions are and those kind of ideas can help ground you when you get really caught up in I must, and all that kind of stuff. I'm all for achievement. That's awesome. I think it's amazing. But sometimes we just get too far over. And I remember the last thing I was going to say is this idea of facing the darkness. So whatever that negative story is in your head, the business is going to collapse. I'm going to have to sell my house. I'm going to be homeless, blah, 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 which can sort of be a reality. I'm not saying it's not. It's just the human mind tends to catastrophize and paint much worse pictures than is actually true and will happen. And that's an evolutionarily thing because it helps protect us in some ways. Although in modern times, that catastrophic storytelling of our brain is not connected to reality. Obviously, there's nuance, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but I think I'll stop with that.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you're saying there, which is like those things could be true.
Yes.
But are they true about the thing that is right in front of you? If this product change took 2 days longer, does the company fail?
Right.
If you don't innovate the product or you don't move forward or you don't close the deal, that might be true. But if you don't close the deal by tomorrow, is that true? And so I think it's like, and if you didn't finish this thing by this deadline at work, every deadline feels urgent and every day there's a deadline. So it's sort of like asking yourself in the bigger arc of the work you're doing, is that thing, and if you fell down on that one thing, does all of it fall apart? Which maybe brings us back to the...
Yeah, sorry, Mike, I just want to interrupt you. That's brilliant. And that's the business mindset that I do not have, right? Thinking about those little examples, that's great. And that's an excellent example. So sorry to interrupt you, but I just...
No worries.
Yeah.
So the company front, if you're a founder, you have the responsibility, obviously, of figuring this out for yourself. And that's kind of where we started.
Yeah.
But you also have to set the tone for the people that you start to bring on board. Maybe you're not a founder. Maybe you work at a large organization. Maybe you're a leader at a large organization. What's your perspective on this? Is managing balance and mental health on the individual? Or is it the responsibility of the company? Or if so, what is that power balance of who owns what elements of the responsibility for? I think that's really important to understand, because then we can articulate, as a founder, as a leader in a company, what you need to be doing or should be doing or are responsible to be doing or not as a piece of this, and what individuals need to go figure out themselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first piece is there's standard law on this, right? Companies sort of, depending on the type of company you are, there are legal obligations that you must fulfill. So understanding that is probably helpful. Then it's, what is the policy of this company? Really, like, that's another big component to all of this is we've worked with companies on their hiring process, right? So when you hire somebody, you make it as clear as day or as possible what is expected of them and what are the supports and all that kind of stuff. So it's really important to, as best you can, upfront what is expected of you, so that when things go sideways or whatever way they go, you have use the baseline idea, have a baseline of what we agreed upon, so to speak. Then really it's all gray area in terms from there. I do think the conversation, I think it sort of died off. COVID really sapped a lot of this stuff, but at least the mental health conversation in corporations. I guess it kind of just, again, depends on what we agree on as the norm here. I got a little lost. One thought disappeared in my head, but one word that we like to use a lot, or one phrase, is the balance between compassion and responsibility. So yes, we want to be compassionate to our colleagues and our team members. We want to care for them. We want to, etc. And at the same time, people are responsible for their job. And that question of, is it the corporation or the small startups' responsibility to take care of the mental health of their employees? And I think up until 10 years ago, the answer was clearly no. And so maybe that is still the answer. I don't know. I think we're probably still figuring that out. And again, it goes back to the unique nature of the team and the workplace and the resources available and all that kind of thing. One thing that I have seen seems to, one answer, I guess you could say, is I think a lot of the big banks and some of these large consulting firms have basically just increased the insurance spending of their policies for their employees. So you have more money to go see a therapist, you have more money to do this, to do that, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, that doesn't apply to smaller corporations, but I think the principles of honesty, one of our principles is courage, right? You need to have the courage to have difficult conversations with your colleagues about what's happening. And that goes back to that dark side thing. We don't like that. Of course, it's uncomfortable. So I sort of danced around that question, but I think it gives a general, some food for thought.
Yeah, there's a balance between the two. So as we kind of bring this all together, Mike, and sort of wrap up here, we've talked about a whole bunch of things, and maybe people are feeling like this was very helpful. Maybe they're feeling like there's still questions for them, or maybe they're feeling overwhelmed. So I think maybe the best thing is, if you were to boil it down to the first step, I think startups, and one of the best pieces of advice I hear about startups that I think translates to everything in life is, if you're feeling overwhelmed, the most important thing to do is just worry about putting one foot in front of the other, that first step. And so in this space around improving your balance, your mental health, what is that first step? If people are going to take away one action today, what is the first step? And if they're looking to find out more, where should they go?
Yeah, on the personal level, I would say it's that inventory or that baseline idea. What is my baseline for balance or for relatively good mental health? Don't compare yourself to others. You can use other people as references, right? Or as information gathering to see kind of what works for others. Ask for help if you need it. Okay. And we all do in some sense. I would probably just sort of stop there. I think it's like, and from there, you gain insight as to what that next step is. And I love the principle of one foot in front of the other, one thing at a time. So you start. There's a great book, a mindfulness book called "Wherever You Go, There You Are," and it's just again that idea: wherever you go, there you are. So you might as well just start from where you are, one foot in front of the other. Do that inventory with as much honesty as you can muster up, because that really matters. And then from there, you'll get more information on what your next steps might be. Then again, there's a plethora of resources and people out there willing to help you. So that's where I would start. That's personal. Workplace, again, same thing, baseline. Do you have mental health KPIs, if you will? What are they? What matters to you? What are your company values? All those kind of things. And are you living in alignment with those values? And if you are, great. And if you're not, how might you find your way back in alignment with those values?
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing so much good advice and having a real deep conversation on this today, Mike. I think it's super important. I'm excited to release this in time for World Mental Health Day. I think the timing of it's important, but this is frankly a long overdue conversation, and I was seeking out the right speaker to be able to talk about this on multiple fronts, and I'm glad you were able to make the time for our audience today. I hope they enjoyed it. I hope they found it useful, and I really hope that they found at least something that they can take away as a first step in the journey. So thanks again for joining us today on the show, Mike, and thank you for everyone that kind of tuned in, and I hope this was super helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. One thing I forgot to mention, it's on YouTube. The audio isn't the best, but if you want to see this conversation unfold, that the last question you asked me, the balance between compassion and responsibility, we have a video of us at Amazon. This was 2 months before COVID happened, of us talking about that with Amazon's head HR person, another HR person, and then 2 doctors, basically. So if you want to, it was a great conversation. You probably get some insight there. So you can check.
We'll make sure
out.
It's linked in the description. So we'll make sure that's one of the call to actions that people can follow up with.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Mike.
Amazing. Thank you, Mike. Bye. Have a great day, everybody.